Texas, a state where the distances between towns are measured in hours of driving across sun-scorched prairies, and lonely farmhouses make the perfect setting for a nightmare. In 2005, Harris County was suffocating under unbearable heat. The Miller family, 24-year-old Jack and his wife Sarah, had just moved into a two-story Victorian house in a quiet neighborhood. The evening was stifling. Little Timmy had been fussy for hours because of his teething, but by 10 o'clock at night, he had finally gone quiet in his cradle on the second floor. The couple went down to the living room to discuss the mortgage bills, leaving their portable Fisher-Price baby monitor switched on the coffee table. An hour passed to the monotonous ticking of the wall clock. Suddenly, a burst of static hissed from the speaker, and then came a sound that made Sarah's fingers turn ice cold. It was a quiet, cracked woman singing. The voice was carrying the melody of Rockabye Baby, but the words were distorted, sounding more like strained wheezing than a lullaby. Jack felt an icy sweat run down his spine. He knew there was no one in the house except them. "Stay here and call 911, he said, grabbing the heavy aluminum Louisville Slugger bat standing in the corner of the hallway. The staircase to the second floor creaked treacherously under his weight. The baby monitor in his hand kept broadcasting the horrible sound. Now, along with the singing, came the creak of floorboards directly overhead. Someone was in the nursery. Someone was standing right over their son's crib. Jack gripped the handle of the bat so tightly his knuckles turned white. He burst into the bedroom, ready to strike, but the room was sunk in half-darkness, lit only by the pale glow of a street lamp outside. Timmy was asleep. But by the window, with her back to the door, sat a figure in a filthy, torn dress. It was a homeless woman whom locals would later identify as Mary "Mad" Gates. She had escaped from the state psychiatric hospital 3 days earlier. In her hands was not a doll, but a kitchen knife, which she was slowly drawing along the railing of the crib, carving deep grooves into the wood. When Jack shouted, the woman turned around with unnatural speed. Her face was covered in sores, and her eyes shone with mad triumph. She had no intention of running. With an animal scream, she lunged at the father, aiming the knife at his throat. Jack instinctively swung the bat. There was a dull, sickening crack, metal meeting the attacker's jaw. Mary collapsed onto the carpet, soaking the pale fibers with thick, dark blood. But even with her jaw broken, she kept making whistling sounds, trying to reach for the man's ankle. The second blow landed on her temple. Dead silence filled the room, broken only by Jack's heavy breathing and the crying of the awakened child. He stood over the body, realizing that the lock on the back door had been forced open earlier that day, and that this woman had been hiding in their closet the entire time while they were eating dinner. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They discovered that under the baby's bed there was a nest made of leftovers and old newspapers. Mary had been living in their house for almost a week, watching them from the shadows. In the pocket of her dress, they found a Polaroid picture of sleeping Timmy, taken only 2 hours before the tragedy. On the back, written in dirty charcoal, were the words, "My new angel." This case changed the county's attitude toward safety forever. People began installing bars on their windows and changing their locks, realizing that a thin plastic baby monitor is not protection, but merely a way to hear evil entering your home. Jack never slept again without a weapon under his pillow, and Sarah was never able to step into that nursery again, where an unwashable brown stain remained on the floor. a reminder of the night their American dream turned into a bloody nightmare. Timmy grew up with no memory of that evening, but for the rest of his life, he would wake in a cold sweat whenever he heard someone, somewhere, softly humming an old children's song. In 1991, in a suburb of Chicago, 19-year-old college student Kate Miller was desperate for money. When she saw an ad looking for a babysitter for one night at the Blackwood family mansion, the $100 payment seemed like a true gift of fate. The mansion stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by thick pine trees that completely hid the facade from the curious eyes of neighbors. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood greeted her in the spacious hall. They looked impeccable. Strict suits, polite smiles, and a strange, almost waxen paleness to their skin. "Our little son David is a very light sleeper," Mrs. Blackwood whispered, adjusting her pearl necklace. "He is in the far room at the end of the eastern wing. Please do not go into him, and under no circumstances disturb him. Just sit in the living room, read your textbooks, or watch television. We will return at exactly midnight." The parents left, and Kate remained alone in the enormous house, filled with heavy antique furniture and dark velvet curtains. The first 3 hours passed relatively quietly, but the ringing silence began to press down on her. The house was unnaturally cold, and from the ventilation grills there suddenly came a strange, cloyingly sweet smell, like medical formalin. At one point, Kate thought she heard a soft scraping sound coming from above, as if someone were slowly dragging sharp claws across the wooden floor directly over her head. Curiosity and her mounting anxiety finally overpowered common sense. At 11 o'clock at night, Kate climbed the wide staircase and headed into the dark eastern wing. The door to the far room was slightly ajar. When she stepped inside and switched on her flashlight, her heart missed one painful beat. This room was not lived in. In the center stood an old crib, but it was covered in thick, sticky cobwebs and coated with an incredibly heavy layer of gray dust that had been gathering there for long decades. Inside lay not a child at all, but a rotting rag doll eaten through by hungry moths. On the wall hung yellowed photographs of a boy in a mourning frame with the date of death, May 14th, 1972. Cold instantly locked the girl's limbs. She ran downstairs toward the front entrance, but when she yanked with all her strength on the handle, there came a heavy metallic clang. The door had been locked from the outside with a massive bolt that was physically impossible to open from within. The windows in the living room suddenly shut behind heavy, reinforced shutters, which dropped automatically, turning the luxurious house into an airtight concrete tomb. Suddenly, the speaker of the internal intercom on the wall came alive with a sharp click. The familiar voice of Mrs. Blackwood, stripped of its former politeness, rang out with a mad, exultant intonation.
"Thank you, dear Kate, for so kindly agreeing to become his new mother. Our poor boy was so lonely in the dark basement all these long years. He is very hungry, and his old mother has become completely worn out. Now it is your turn to feed him with yourself."
At that moment, the floorboards behind Kate creaked loudly. From the impenetrable darkness of the corridor leading straight to the deep basement emerged something that only remotely resembled a human being. It was a creature with disproportionately long limbs, and a face crudely pulled tight by old surgical scars. It moved quickly on all fours, making horrible gurgling sounds. In its bony hands, Kate saw rusty medical instruments. In the 90s, Illinois State Police never managed to uncover any trace of Kate Miller. By official records, the Blackwood Mansion had already been listed as abandoned for 20 years, while the electricity bills continued to be paid regularly through anonymous funds. When, a decade later, new owners decided to completely demolish the building, workers discovered an iron cage in a basement chamber sealed behind a massive double brick wall. Inside lay the remains of several young women whose bones had been carefully polished and arranged in strict anatomical order. On the wall, the name Kate had been written in dried blood, and beside it lay an old baby pacifier attached to a human skull.
This story began in 1991, when suburban comfort became a form of amnesia. The family moved into a perfect world, pressed lawns, flags on porches, and smiles behind which you couldn't make out a single living thought. On the very first evening, Mr. Hale appeared on the doorstep. The neighbor across the street had a face without an age and a voice that wrapped around you like fog. He was holding a pie. The father shook his hand. Hale's palm was dry and unnaturally cold, as if he had just been touching Arctic metal. Hale smiled for exactly 1 second longer than good manners allowed. That night, the lock on the front door clicked by itself, even though everyone in the house was asleep. A week later, reality began to crumble. First, the car keys vanished. The father turned the house upside down, insisting to his wife that he'd left them on the table, but in the morning he found them on the porch, right in the center of the welcome mat. No dust, no marks, as if they'd been placed there by the air itself. Hale, passing by, merely remarked that in this neighborhood, what's lost always turns up. His words didn't sound like reassurance, but like a statement of ownership. Then photographs started disappearing from the albums. At first, a few random shots, then whole pages. Pictures from their old life, the old city, meetings with friends, dissolved, leaving behind only the smell of aging paper and a blankness. Next went the documents: birth certificates, insurance papers, passports. The family was losing its right to exist, and along with the paperwork, the days began to vanish too. One morning, they found a dirty plate on the table, sprinkled with pie crumbs. No one remembered eating it. No one remembered when it had been brought. It was evidence of their own absence from their own lives. Outside, everything still smelled of freshly cut grass, and the scent became unbearable because it signaled the world around them was fine, so only they were falling apart. The breaking point came when the father enlarged a recent photo from a family barbecue. At the edge of the frame stood Hale. His hand rested on the father's shoulder with the confident possessiveness of an owner. The mother swore the neighbor hadn't been at the party, but in every old photo, from the fair, from a walk, from the park, Hale appeared, like a hidden defect in the film. At first, he was somewhere in the crowd, then closer, and finally right at the center. In the pictures, he never looked at the camera. He looked straight into the eyes of whoever would be holding the photo years later. In the local precinct's archives, the father found dozens of cases. The pattern was identical: a move, small things going missing, gaps in memory, and then an empty house. In every archival photo, among the vanished families, Hale was there. A policeman, eyes lowered, admitted there were no records of Hale. He didn't exist in any documents, He existed only in the pictures of those who were trying to forget. The final blow came from the family album. The father discovered a photo of their family standing in front of that very house, but the date on the back read 1987. The surname in the missing persons file matched their own. The past wasn't simply being lost, it was being cut away, layer by layer, replaced with a counterfeit idol. That evening, someone knocked at the door. On the doorstep stood Hale again, with yet another pie. The mother, staring at an empty folder where their documents should have been, suddenly asked in a quiet voice what their son's name was. Silence answered. The name had been erased along with the photographs. Hale stepped gently over the threshold, handing the pie to the father like a symbol of surrender. He wasn't an enemy. He was the curator of their oblivion, helping them fit into an endless now where there is no pain of the past, because there is no past at all. On the welcome mat lay a new set of keys. Beside it, a fresh photograph. In it, the family smiled happily in front of the house. In the very center stood Mr. Hale, fatherly arms around their shoulders. He looked straight at you, knowing, your turn to remember will end soon, too.